brought to you by Renegade River.
News Talk 1090 is the talk of Muskegon.
Welcome. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt. Today in the studio with us is my often co-host, Jim Riley. Welcome back.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And on the line with Jim and I is George Moss. George, welcome back to the Renegade River Show.
I am very happy to be with you again, Mike, and thank you for inviting me.
You know, George, it's always a pleasure. Just for listeners' background, George is a retired public educator, currently a lecturer at the U of M Flint, and he's also the host of a Flint-based podcast show, which is titled What's Going On. And he's a prolific writer on Facebook, writes a bunch of blogs, and I think that's evidence that you got to be careful what you're going to put online, because some radio show somewhere will grab you and get you on the air and make you stand up to whatever you said. So, George, welcome back to the show. It's really good to have you here.
Okay, and Mike, I want to thank you for having me back. I enjoyed the last time we were talking on your program, and looking forward to a very lively conversation today.
Yeah, I think we're going to do it. I've got a handful of things that are on the table I wanted to kick around about. Last week, on the show here, we had Jim Brown, who was a retired Pontiac police officer and a former vice president and then president of a police union. And a lot of folks probably didn't know this because my sister's very shy, but during that show, my sister was in the studio, actually sitting in Jim Riley's chair. So
golly.
I know, and I got to tell you, she looked way, way, way better than you do sitting there.
Well, I do sense that it's quite warm where I'm sitting here.
But I had a lot of people, because of the YouTube posting of the show, ask, who did you keep looking at? And, of course, I'm looking at my sister, Brenda. So, Brenda, if you're out there listening, it was very great having you last week in the studio with us. But today what I'm hoping to talk about, first off, is the big title, I guess, to bite off is what's happening to the big cities of Michigan, meaning Flint and Detroit and Saginaw, and I'm not wanting to dive into the pension stuff again, and I'm not wanting to talk about racial issues and all that. But when I look at the math of the city, take Detroit as an example. The population is over 50% lower than it was a decade ago. Saginaw's off even more than that. Saginaw, if you go to Saginaw, it's like there's 20 people that somebody forgot to tell to turn the lights off. That's all that's left in what was once a gigantic city. But sadly, the financial side of that reality is that most of the debt load that was incurred when everybody is there is still hanging there, and of course the numbers of people paying that debt load has dropped dramatically. But George, what do you see on this topic from your vantage point?
Well, I see a commonality in the cities that you mentioned, Detroit, Flint, Saginaw, and I think the problems are fairly the same in these three cities and others as well. Michigan itself was the industrial capital of the United States. Detroit was the wealthiest city in the country at one point. I remember coming here to visit my father in Detroit. I lived in Birmingham, and I would come here to visit my father in the summertime, and I would come to Detroit, and that was always a big deal. Go downtown, you see all the stores open, a lot of lively things taking place. Business was booming in Detroit at that time. I'm talking about back in the 50s and 60s. And then a number of things began to take place. One was that the cost of labor that was artificially pushed up, I think, by unions that did not understand that wages are based upon productivity. It's not based upon, as they're saying, for example, in the fast food restaurants right now, it's not based upon what you need as a living wage. The question is, what does the production cost pay for? And if you think that the wage rate is increased because you belong to a union, you make a very big mistake. And what happened was at some point, the cost of labor of doing business in some of these industrial cities, you think about Detroit, you think about Flint and Saginaw, at some point it becomes cost prohibitive for businesses to stay where they are, and they locate in areas where the cost of labor is in fact lower. And you saw a floodgate of businesses vacating these industrial centers and going elsewhere. And I don't think it's by happenstance. I think it's because there were a couple of things that we didn't understand about what drives the cost of labor. It's not the union that determines that. It's going to be the production. And if you raise labor costs above what the production can pay for, then business look elsewhere and how to survive under those particular circumstances. At a certain point, all the strikes where what it really was holding a gun to the head of business people, and they were saying that if you don't, in fact, meet our costs, then we are going to shut your business down where you don't have any production going on. And that works for a period of time, but at a certain point, if the business is trying to survive the more or less dictatorial arrangement where you can dictate whether the business will be open or not, they're going to have to do some other things that would be outside the loop of what they've done in the past once the cost gets up to a certain point. So then at a sub-point zero level where the costs are moving is no longer prohibitive because the cost of labor is up to the point where it's a break-even proposition, plus in the future you can actually save on the cost of labor, then moving becomes an option. And you see that in Detroit, which was once a city of, 2 million people, now has 700,000. Flint, as you said, had doubled its population when it was the capital. We had Buick here, and we had GM, the home of GM is Flint. And you saw that the same thing happened here, where labor was making demands, and at a certain point, the industrialization in the city began to decline, and we've gone down from 80,000 jobs we had in Flint to now 10,000 industrial jobs in the city, in Genesee County, as a matter of fact. So from 80,000 workers when business was in fact booming, and now down to 10,000. And you look where those places that unions, not unions, but the businesses went to, they went to right to work states. And if you notice it, Michigan's response, it was like the horse is now out of the barn and you put the doors up. But we became a right to work state. But that's in the aftermath of all of the things that happened that would have saved some things in the cities if that had occurred earlier. But now that we have the jobs now vacating the premises, it's going to be quite a battle to bring those jobs back in these industrial centers. First of all, it's not just that the businesses pick up. It also has a effect upon the educational system in terms of the monies that are therefore not available to pay for the cost of educating children, and therefore the labor force in the future is in fact hurt. And so then you look in Detroit where one statistic says that 47% of the people in Detroit right now are functionally illiterate. It does not mean they can't read words on a page. It means that they're not functional in their literacy. And so 47%, that's almost half the population that is functionally illiterate in that city. And I think you probably see that kind of statistic in most of these cities, and that does not forebode the kind of climate in which business wants to resell in an area.
Yeah, George,
it cannot benefit from the education that's taking place.
Yeah, no question, George. I saw some stats that suggested that the educational production in Detroit is on par with that of Haiti and Cambodia.
I believe that's true.
And so is the result of that. So is the fiscal foundation is also on par with Haiti and Cambodia. Those things, I believe, are, as you pointed out, are very interlocked. But when you and I talked last, one of the things I'd said at the time was that we can't save America unless we can save America's inner cities, which is kind of what we're talking about. And you made the point at the time that we can't save inner city America unless we save the American family. And so that is crucial. When I look at Detroit and Flint and Saginaw, I say, what are the things that are absent from the time when I used to safely go to Detroit in the early 60s to now? And to me, yes, the numbers are certainly down, but it almost looks as if there's been two stages. You had white flight, and now you've got black flight, and you've been left with a virtually empty city. And I mean, it's almost one of those self-created prophecies where people used to say, like the Sally Struthers thing, talking about Ethiopia, if they're starving in Ethiopia, why don't they pack their bags and move? And so you have people starving in Detroit, and those people that could read functionally could fill out an application, work to get their families out of there. But it begs the question of it's not, we can't do a big broad paintbrush thing and say everybody's got a broken family and everyone can't read. There are people there that are trying to build the city that can do all of these things and do have a successful home life. But the question is, how do we duplicate that? What can we do to foster that?
Mm-hmm. Can I just jump in here one sec?
Sure.
I lived in the Detroit suburbs for a good portion of the 60s, and like you, George, I would go down to Grand Circus Park, and I'd go to the movie theater, and they had an automat down there, and things have changed significantly in 40, 50 years. But I must say I was horribly disappointed when I saw the results of this election on Tuesday, just a few days ago, where virtually every single Detroit city councilman who was running for re-election was re-elected. And that tells me that the citizens, at least the voting citizens in the city of Detroit, are quite pleased with the leadership that they've had and pleased enough to re-elect them for the future. Now, I know the mayor's a different situation, but what do you do when the people within this disaster, and whatever city or state it may be, California might be another example, but what do you do when the people themselves really don't want change and they make that decision made very clear when they vote for the exact same people who drove them off a cliff?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's that paralysis of analysis again in terms of how they got here and who do you blame for it. Some of it is really not the present leader's fault in terms of the fact. I mean, some of it is their fault because of the lack of leadership and showing different ways of getting out of it. But what they have here, basically driving this train, is the legacy cost. That is, say, the inheritance that they had to pay for based upon past decision-making made by other politicians. As that plays out in America, to give you a larger picture of it, is that the collapse of America that is imminent if we don't get off this course that we're on, that those persons that are responsible for that are in office right now. They may not be in office when the final collapse occurs, but they are the ones making decisions now. And when the collapse occurs down the road, and it will occur because of the kinds of systemic problems being introduced on a daily basis by the decision makers in Washington, the collapse is going to occur. You cannot sustain the amount of spending that's taking place. But that would be something that collapses down the road, and they'll be out of power by then, and then others have to pay that price for it.
No question about it, George. George, you're right on the money with that, and a classic example of what we're dealing with in terms of all of America is I remember as a young man listening to people talk about Coleman Young. They said the decisions he's making are going to cost the city for 20 and 30 and 40 years into the future. And guess what? We're 20 or 30 or 40 years into the future now, and the bill that he caused, and then not only just him, but the ideology that he so well represented, that bill is coming due. And now Snyder's way of dealing with it is to not to deal with it at all. We can do bankrupt, or we can tell all the current police, not all of these folks are going to get hosed out of what we've committed to them on. We're not going to sell any of our assets. We're just going to just not pay people. So that's a fascinating way of approaching it. And to me, it's not a really great way of demonstrating to the citizens of Detroit the change that they need to make. That's what I see.
Well, Mike, I'll say this also, and those are good points you're making about it. We're going to have to look at what some cities have done under the same circumstances. There's one city in I think, Georgia. And right now, what they have 7 different city employees, and the rest of it is privatization, where you turn it over into the private sector, which has to run it efficiently, or they go out of business and they have an incentive to get it right. There's no incentive really when you are making decisions, as happened in Detroit, happened in Flint, happened in Saginaw and other cities. There's not really no incentive to get it right, because the emphasis there is that you're going to socialize risk, meaning you pass the risk off to the taxpayer, and you privatize the benefit, meaning that you are going to have the political office seeker getting elected. That benefits him, and the cost of that and the decision that he or she makes, is passed off to the taxpayers. There's no incentive to get it right. So when you privatize, and that is one of the options I saw in Detroit they're looking at, there was some discussion taking place about the Bellevue. What's that island? Belle Isle.
Sure, Belle Isle.
I went to Belle Isle when I came here to visit my father, and that was just a wonderful place to go for picnics. I remember the horse rides and things like that. Just a number of things you could do with family. Very safe. And one person I was listening to talk about bringing Detroit back was saying that they would like to invest in Belle Isle and create a kind of like a city within a city and privatize it so that it is a money-making venture that, in fact, pays for itself and doesn't have to rely upon the government for its largesse.
And he used Singapore. He used Singapore as an example.
Mm-hmm. Singapore is an example. That place is, in fact, they understand what we once knew and have now forgotten about, and that is that socialism doesn't work, capitalism works. We are really, if you look in these cities, that is just another example of what we had an economic system that was based upon capitalism, where the market drove the decision-making. When the politicians get involved in it, and this is a point made by W. von Mises, who makes this point in his book called The Anti-Capitalist Mentality, he talks about the reason why America was an exceptional country in the 19th century and some parts of the 20th century, and is no longer that now, is because we were the country where the government got involved in interfering with business last. Every other country that had interference, you see the results of that. But in America, we had laissez-faire economics. We had the capital system running for leave us on a policy of leave us alone. And therefore, the business people, the creative ones that create jobs, they were able to, in fact, become the entrepreneurs, knowing that whatever they were able to create, they would benefit by that which they had produced, and it would benefit those who were the producers.
No question about it, George.
Now.
George, hold that thought, because we're going to go to a break, and we're going to pick right up where we left off in just a few minutes, folks. Welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt. We're in the studio with Jim Riley today, and on the telephone with George Moss, a lecturer at the U of M Flint and a podcast host. Podcast, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you.
I'm thinking invaders from Mars here, and if he's a pod host, we've got some serious problems.
I think the folks on the extreme left think that may be true. George, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, again for inviting me.
Hey, but when we went to break, you were touching on privatization a little bit. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into that because I really wanted this segment of the show today to be about the recipe for solving the problems in places like Detroit, Flint, and Saginaw. So when you talk about privatization, though, just so that I can get my head around it, are you also talking about privatizing police and fire, or what parts of the cities are you talking about privatizing?
Well, I don't know if it has to go into the fire department and the police department, but much of the city services can be privatized, and there are cities that are in fact doing it. Garbage delivery services, for example, that can be privatized, and it has been done in the area where I live. And we have a greater amount of efficiency, the sewage.
Let me stop you for a minute, because I got to tell you something. First off, I agree with you, so I'm not pushing back. But my concern with it is that another form of socialism is one where private industry gets to hold ownership over their property, but the city or the governing body has them so regulated and so controlled that, in effect, the same decisions are made regardless of who actually holds title to the company. And my concern is that in places like Detroit, even if some miracle happened and they were able to privatize public works, which I would be strongly in favor of, that the city and frankly Governor Snyder's office and his emergency manager political fiasco would still keep their thumb right on the top of these people's foreheads and not allow success to prevail. What do you say to that?
We've got to get the government out of the economy. First of all, they have no role and no right to be involved in all this regulatory behavior. Last year, we had a total of 170,000 pages of regulation on the book on the federal level. This is absurd and outrageous. You don't really need, in a profit motive driven system, regulations on the book. You just need to have the laws that everyone has to follow. No exception to the fact that laws are being applied equally to all citizens, and they apply equally to businesses as well. You don't need to have politicians involved in it. And I must add a point here that I don't think anybody else has made, and that is that the 170,000 pages of regulations against business is really a level of paranoia on the part of the politicians, who are really frightened by the possibility that the people will find out it is a business person that drives the society, not the politicians. And that's why you see them talking about they're going to create jobs. When has a politician ever created a job, and how would they do that? If we, for example, say that we want to have jobs created in Chrysler Corporation and rebuild that foundation for that in General Motors, what would the politicians say would be item 1, 2, and 3 in terms of what are the steps need to be taken in order to do that? And I'm sure you get some jargon and some nonsense about how it is in fact created, because politicians don't create jobs. What they do is that they in fact make these decisions that in fact kill the environment through which jobs will be created. We need to unleash the entrepreneurial power in the United States, where that which is earned by the producers, they can in fact keep that which they earn. Did you hear last week Keith Ellison, representative from Minnesota? He said the government's not broke. Now we have a $17 trillion deficit going toward that deficit.
That was
and he was saying
scary.
He was saying, like he was making the point that the government's not broke. It's just that we don't have our hands on some of the money that's out there. And since Buffett and people like Bill Gates have money, the government's not broke as long as they have the power to seize the wealth of others. Well, the problem that creates with a person that has no understanding of economics is that you de-incentivize any kind of entrepreneurial spirit, because if you're going to confiscate the wealth of those who are producing, why would they want to produce it to give it away to someone who did not, in fact, earn it?
The problem, the problem with it is, George, is that we're so politically correct in this society that we can't call things what they are. In this instance, that fellow is a communist. By definition, and people say, "Oh, Mike, quit calling people names." I'm not calling people names.
No,
by definition,
who they are.
By definition, absolutely, he's a communist. And let me interject on that point. I've heard you use the term laissez-faire several times today. And I have to tell you, first off, I embrace that. But folks like him they believe that that's as dirty of a term as the word communist is. I mean, they literally are functionally afraid of that term. They're thinking if government doesn't control it, we're in dire straits. They believe that, even with examples like Detroit proving them wrong. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I wanted just to add on this that I have perhaps a problem with both of you in this Representative Ellison's comment. We have so many American voters, people who live in this country who are allowed to vote, that can hear a congressman like Ellison say, "Hey, we're not broke. We've got all this wealth here, and it's not being utilized correctly." We're hearing this all the time: underutilization of assets, and it sounds pretty good to an awful lot of people. And Keith Ellison is very unlikely to face a primary or a general election challenge, probably in his lifetime. It wouldn't surprise me that at some point he might even run for Senate in the state of Minnesota. These types of comments, certainly the broad support, at least initially, of Obamacare, a lot of people like the idea of making their lives, quote, better by taking money from others. What do we do, just as I said in Detroit, when the people support the very concepts that we may disagree with and abhor, but may also be destructive to themselves? What do we do if these folks vote themselves that kind of power?
It's about education and family. And to that question, I received an email right before. In fact, I was already on the air today from a friend encouraging the success of this show. And the quote was, "Wake up the lazy voter and inform the uninformed."
Well stated, by the way.
Yes. You're making a very good point.
How can anyone deny that? That lack of foundation is the problem. Our founders talked about as long as we can maintain a virtuous and informed society, we're going to be okay. Well, we don't have a virtuous, nor do we have an informed society. So to this point, wake up the lazy voter.
We have to look at some of the things. Well, in 2010, we saw what is really possible in terms of the electorate. We turned out 25% of the office holders in the Congress of the United States, and there were 672 persons nationwide that lost their positions. So this monopoly that you were talking about in terms of these office holders that returned, I mean, Dingell has been there 57 years, and before him, his father was there 22 years. That is now beginning to be challenged, and we're seeing people run to the primaries challenging these incumbents. There's a person, Graham, down in South Carolina. There are 3 people that are challenging him in the Republican Party. They think that he's no longer really a Republican. We have McCain going out. We have Dingell stepping down in 2014, and there are challenges being made to change this paradigm that you're talking about in terms of these office holders who go up there and they act like they are going to just never leave. And voters are now rising up. The Tea Party and other groups are rising up to change the way in which we do business in this country. And there are movements going on. It's not all broken. There are movements going on right now so that the business has been business as usual in the past. That paradigm, I think we're going to see a shift in that as the particulars play out as what these policies are leading us to. In other words, there's going to be a lot of opportunity, even when the unsustainable course we are on now meets its ultimate end. We're going to find opportunity to change some paradigmatic things in the aftermath of this imminent, and I do think it's imminent collapse that's right around the corner. I'm very hopeful.
George, I agree with you specifically on one point, actually a whole bunch of them, but one point I want to draw a little bit of an illustration to, and that's that I remember back in the early 2000s, 01, 02, 03, we had state representatives and state senators that were missing hundreds of votes. And the media wasn't writing about it, and the public was okay with it. And if you went to either a Democrat or a Republican county meeting that happened to be of the seat from whoever that rep or state senator was, there was no talk about it. It was a non-issue. At the time, I remember sitting at a county GOP meeting on this very topic, and I was looking around probably with my mouth dropped open in amazement that nobody in the party, 70 or so people, seemed to acknowledge, much less care, that they had a representative missing hundreds of votes. Nowadays, we've come far enough nowadays that I've seen very good state representatives have to write position papers about why they missed 3 or 4 votes for some family issue or tragedy. And so I say that because the light has really gotten to where it's shining a lot brighter on our representation and the folks that are making these decisions for us. And that's to me has got to be part of the cure. Now, whether it's too late or not, that, to your final point, I don't know that.
Yeah, it's never too late. We're going to have to get a handle on where we're going in this country, and I think that this downturn is going to push us to some decisions that under other circumstances would not be made. We just cannot continue doing the businesses we're doing in these cities and in the country at large, and we're going to have to change the way in which we do business in this country. We can't afford it. We can't afford our foreign policy where we're giving aid, borrowing money to give aid. We're putting, we're beginning to put taxes on our children that are not even born yet. We have to stop that. We got to stop printing $85 billion a month in what is called QE infinity because they don't know what the cutoff date is going to be. These policies have to be we have to stop killing the dollar and things of that sort and get back to an austere budget where we stay within our means. I'm watching to see what they're going to do with Obamacare in Washington, how that affects the cities and what the states are going to do about it because they just can't afford it. We can't afford any more entitlements.
We can't, George. We can't afford it. But let me that's a passion point of mine, as my listeners and those that read my posts are aware. We can't afford Obamacare, but while we're all agreeing, all of the Republicans, all of the conservatives, all of the libertarians that I have contact with, not like some of them or most of them or 99%, none of that math, all of them say we can't afford Obamacare. That while at this very moment, our governor in Michigan, along with governors in several other states, are working to promote and ram down our throat the Medicaid explosion scam. And I have to tell you, folks, that is the foundation of, or perhaps the replacement of, Obamacare. So if you're thinking we're winning the war on Obamacare in Washington, that while Snyder is ramming it down our throat here in Michigan, you're fooling yourself. But I need to change gears because we don't have that much time left. If I might, one of the things I pointed up early in the show when we first got going is that I was going to try to highlight a few of the things you've got on your Facebook page, if I might, George. And one of them that was kind of caught my attention is you wrote a piece on the N-word. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I am kind of tired of the political correctness that we have in the country where we can't even talk to each other anymore. The N-word, there's no such thing as the N-word. There are two letters that make up words, and that's I and A. N is not a word, and when you say the N-word, I'm asking the question, which N-word are you talking about? There's many N-words as there are M-words, and no one has thought of coining a term for the D-word for those persons that call people dogs. So why is the N-word such a prohibited term? And creepy-ass crackers, excuse me for saying that, but that's the word that was used by Trayvon Martin.
We're not offended.
According to Rachel Gentile and her testimony in the Zimmerman trial, and when she was mentioning that word on the air in Piers Morgan's program, no one was abhorrent about it. Nobody was complaining, and she had no hesitation in using that word. So then all of a sudden we get to the N-word, quote unquote, and we can't say the word anymore. We can't say these things because some words have more license than others, and that word is totally prohibited. We even fired a person, Paula Dean, that mentioned that where it came out that she had said the word 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago.
A Southern gal said it, 30 years ago. My good Lord, are we going to be asking what people's thoughts are? I mean, it's incredible.
That's what it's coming to if we don't get off that train. We had a football player that went to a concert, had an altercation with the security person that was there, probably one of 3 blacks that was in the whole place, and he said that I will whip and use that word in here. All of a sudden, all the football players couldn't play football with this guy anymore. Someone had to go on medical leave. And yet, in the locker room, that word is tossed around with license in the locker rooms where the blacks are, in fact, using it. What we have here, quite frankly, is we have a dishonest discourse going on in this country.
It is very dishonest.
Very dishonest, where people are trying to find some way to continue what I think it relates to continue white guilt.
Well, you're right, George. I got to tell you, though, the lady that you cited, it was Trayvon's not ex-girlfriend. I was a little bit foggy about what their relationship was, but the woman that you were talking about, she kind of educated me on both those two words. The I can say the whole cracker, so I don't have to say the C word, but the other word that I can't say, which is just a fascinating thing to me, but she defined them both and gave them completely different meanings, to at least that I had always understood. But she said that the word cracker ends with an A, refers to all people who are security related or police officers, and not white people, and wasn't a racist term to her whatsoever. And
well, it is a racist term, and I'm not going to adopt her excuse making.
George, you're shocking me. I didn't know that.
I was very upset with Piers Morgan in that interview because he was just drinking it up. And Gentile, and what do you mean in the ghetto when you're using that word? And he's so comfortable with her saying it over and over again. But he would be really shocked and angry and vilified if they use the other word on this program. And this double standard has to stop. If the word is not palatable to use in the public square, then the word should not be used. And nobody should tell me that if you spell the word N-word Nigga as opposed to the other way you spell it, that it's okay in one case when one group is using it and not okay in another case. Either the word has to be, in fact, denounced, whoever the user is, or then the word has to be licensed.
What do we do with all of the parrots in this country that might say Polly want a cracker?
Yeah.
I mean, is PETA going to come down on us?
Right. And these other terms we have firecracker. What about these terms? We'd have to change the whole language if we're going to be politically correct in watching what we say.
Listen,
we've got to have honest discussion in the country about race.
I got to tell you.
We can't have it if you're going to shut people up.
That's right.
What happened to the society, Mike, that we used to live in, where we came up, where name calling was pretty general, and we had this statement, sticks and stones would break my bones, but names would never hurt me. When we were a stronger people, that was how we felt about all these names that are being used.
Yeah,
and it's not really, as I said in my post, it's not really what you called me as much as it is what I answer to.
Right. No, there's no question about that, George. The reality of it is the reason we've become so hypersensitive is that there's a large political bloc in America that's entire purpose is to divide us into little dinky sections, little dinky voter blocks, by the way, that are more easily managed. And they don't have a problem in the world with causing a lot of people pain and anguish in their pursuit of doing that. But listen, everybody, we've got to slip to a break. We will be right back in just a few moments. Welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show. My name is Mike Hewitt, and we're got Jim Riley in the studio with us today, and on the line with us is George Moss. Welcome back, gentlemen.
Okay, thanks again, Mike.
Hey, when we left off, we were talking about the absence or the reality of the fact that there's no such thing as an N-word, and I wanted to pause for a minute on that point. I had posted this today on the Facebook page that was part of what we were going to be discussing was the. And I think the way I'd written it is that there is no such word. And a fellow that I met a number of years ago. He's a preacher from the Detroit community. His name is the Reverend Pitts, Robert Pitts Jr. He posted on the comment, Mike, as much as we agree, there is no denying that there is an N-word. People cannot bury it, act like it doesn't exist, nor embrace it to nullify its effects. But listen, while I think he's exactly right, and that's the point really that I believe you're saying today, George, I got to just do a quick 60-second or less inset. When I met Mr. Pitts, we were both at the Mackinac Leadership Conference up in Mackinac Island. It was late after an evening of festivities, and for those not familiar with it, it's a biannual Republican Leadership Conference that goes on up on Mackinac Island. At the very end of the evening, Robert Pitts was sitting on some front of the Grand Hotel, and I was standing there, and we were waiting for the next carriage to take us to wherever he was going and off to a place that I'd rented. And so while we were waiting, these two ladies come down, and they were the kind of ladies, frankly, that they were older with minks, and they were I think they're the ones that the extreme left like to use as caricatures of what the Republicans are really like, because they just were dolled up with just shy of bouffant hairdos and mink coats and diamonds and jewels, and and of course they stepped in front of us because seemingly enough it was their turn and not Mr. Pitts and I who'd been waiting there for a while. But where I'm going with the short story is, while they step in front of us, as soon as they get in front of us, a carriage rides up or rolls up, and as soon as the horses come to a stop, they went to the bathroom, and that on the cable or the what do you call those bricks? I'm drawing a mental blank on the bricks, but it's a brick. It's not pavement; it's brick up in front, and at any rate, the horses did what they do, and of course it spattered all over the ladies, and that's a terrible, terrible story, except for they were so rude and stepping in front of us and so pompous. Yeah, it was so pompous, assuming that they were ahead of us. The reason I'm bringing this up now is it goes, I think, to how people can take some snap judgments of who each other are. I think that they decided that Robert Pitts and I were beneath them, quite frankly.
You didn't like them because they had bouffant hairdos.
They reminded me of the wife on The Simpsons with the blue tall hair.
Marge.
Yeah, Marge. But of course, and now maybe they were really nice people, but the Reverend and I think that him and I have never had this conversation, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think him and I both drew the same conclusion about who they were. And
why do you think that they actually that were rude like that and were taking the position in front of you as they did. What do you think was the motivation?
My guess is, and listen, it's a guess, and part of the problem in America is that I think everybody does a lot of guessing. My guess is that they saw me standing there with a black fellow, and they thought we were both hired help, and that was the end of our story. I really believe that. Now, I don't know what the real reason was, but I can tell you that Robert Pitts and I ended up sharing a carriage ride, and you could have heard both of us laughing like two roaring idiots all the way through the island as we were riding off to our two respective places, because it was truly funny. But the point of the story is that we all draw conclusions on preconceived notions that sometimes are not right, and I think it goes to how the word, the N-word is used. Like you were pointing out before we went to break, that it's used very cavalierly in the black community. Yeah, in the back room, it's like is and was. It's just a word.
And that's why it's hypocritical for them to take such an umbrage when the term is used otherwise. If they're going to use the word and license it among themselves, they have no moral claim upon being outraged when used by others. It's either going to be outlawed by everybody and nobody's licensed to use it, or you cannot, in fact, pick and choose the moments in which the word is appropriate. The fact that this word is used as a more hurtful word than you were saying the word cracker, why would this word be more of a wounding than that word would be? When you consider the fact that the claim is that, well, it's because it goes back to days of slavery. Well, there are no slaves that are living right now that live back in that time period. And so the idea that you can viscerally be wounded by a term for a consequence that you did not, in fact, suffer, and the ones that are here right now did not bring the suffering about, then that word should not be any more wounded than other words. We're going to either have to get rid of words that descriptive of people that derogate their humanity, and we have to do that wholesale, where all these words, in fact, will be off limits in public discourse, or then we cannot ban words in public discourse. I'm not for banning any words, by the way. I think that we have to be honest. And if you are using the word that to describe a behavior, then I think that term has some utility in that sense. The other thing is this. We have this thing about racial profiling. I have written against the idea that that's even possible. I know that the political correct is that George Zimmerman racially profiled Trayvon Martin, and that the president said that he's gone into stores and he has, in fact, had people dive to the sidewalk and get out of this president and things of that sort. You cannot racially profile because there's no profile that you can have for an entire group. I mean, Clarence Thomas is part of the black group. I don't think you read him out of the race yet. So this idea that there's a profile for the entire group is nonsense. What you're doing there is that you are individually profiling based upon some memory that you have about how that particular person who looked that way has acted in the past. You're not racially profiling because I don't have a video on. And you're certainly not making a profile of George Moss, who is absent from that environment, who you cannot profile because they're not all lined up somewhere. So we have this language we have language right now that we've adopted that absolutely keep us from having the kind of normal discourses that I'm saying we need to have in this country, because there's so much nonsense that's entered into the public domain that makes no sense at all. I'd ask in my post, tell me how you racially profile someone that comes out of a group of 50 million people, which is Black America. How do you profile in that? What's the profile of the group that he belongs to? When I'm in a store and people are getting out of my way, I understand what's going on there. They don't know me, and they are making some assumptions based upon the way that I might be dressed at that point in time. What I found out, though, is I come in there with my other attire on, I don't get the same reaction. What they're doing is saying that someone in their purview, in their background, that was dressed the way I'm dressed when I have my shirt out and I might have my jeans on and I have my regular tennis shoes on, they're saying that someone who looked that way, you remind me of that particular situation that I had with a person like that I don't know if you're that person or not. Not that you're the same person, but are you of that particular character?
So they're making
an individuation of profiling. It's never going to be the whole group.
So they're making a social profile rather than a racial profile, is what
it's always individuated. You cannot make a group profile because there's no profile that fits the whole group.
No question about it. Listen, I think we're almost out of time, and before we And before we run completely out, I've just got the 1 minute symbol. Before we run completely out of time, I want to talk real briefly about something totally different. I've recently began or formed a company named Hewitt and Associates Consulting. It is a full-service political consulting source. It is located at my current headquarters in Spring Lake, Michigan. The phone number for those who are either considering running for office and looking for some direction or help, or maybe know somebody that they can refer, phone number directly is 616-405-3420. Or Hewitt and Associates Consulting can be found on Facebook, as well as the Renegade River Show. And the Renegade River Show, by the way, can be picked up on YouTube, where you get to watch us say the things we're saying when we're saying it, and hear Oscar laughing at us. And George, listen, I wanted to thank you very much for coming on the show again. I appreciate it every time, and I look forward to having you on again in the future.
Okay, look forward to it, Mike, and thank you again. And it's real good to meet your co-hostess.
Hostess? Hey, I am not a lady. Great to talk to you, George.
Yeah, I think that was...
I really appreciate it, and I hope we will be able to meet again real soon.
Oh.
And if not on the air, we can sometime get together and kick the issues over a cup of coffee.
That'd be great.
We're going to do it, and by the way, that was an accurate profile of Jim. Thank you very much,
I
everybody.
need a grief counselor.
We'll see you all next week.
Okay.